What if I told you that being left-brained or right-brained is a lie? What if I told you that learning gets harder as you age is a lie? What if I told you that these lies are all around us, that we've come to accept, and that they cage us in our comfort zone? Today, we'll be destroying learning myths. These lies, they affect how we see ourselves, our human capabilities, and our potential. What are these learning myths that hold us back? Let's get started. People believe that they learn best based on their individual learning style. You may know these already. There's visual learning, in which you're watching videos or looking at slides. There's auditory learning, which is listening to people. There is kinesthetic, which is a hands-on approach. But here's the catch. No one agrees on how many there are. Sometimes there's 3. Sometimes there's 4 with reading and writing. Sometimes there's more with social and logical. No one agrees and has a consensus on how many there are. And the kicker is, only 1 in 10 claim to have a single learning style. That means that 90% of us already accept that we learn in multiple learning styles. What's most intriguing is that when it comes to these learning styles, they can actually limit us when we only follow 1 or 2 learning styles. You see, learning styles are like preferences. They're not the best way you learn. It's like the way you choose and the way you like to learn. When you think about learning, it's more about the goal. It's more about the task. It's about what you want to achieve rather than your individual learning style. Let's go ahead and take a real example. Let's say I wanted to learn how to cook pad thai for the first time. What would be the most effective method? I could watch a bunch of videos. I could call a friend and ask them. I could try to get into the kitchen. I could read a cookbook. Well, the best method would probably be a mix of many. But if I were to just sit and watch multiple videos, because that is my learning style, and I claim that to be my learning style, then I would stay in my comfort zone. And I wouldn't gain as much as if I had just gone into the kitchen and really embraced a more kinesthetic approach. So you see, when it comes to learning styles, they actually hold us in our comfort zone, instead of pushing us outside of our comfort zone where most learning happens. What I'm trying to say here is that there are many different ways of learning, and most learning may happen outside of the comfort zone. So the bottom line is, instead of following 1 learning style, become a sponge and absorb everything using multiple learning styles. Now let's move on to the next learning myth. People believe that they are left-brained or right-brained. This means that people may think that they're more analytical and left-brained, or they're more creative and right-brained. Well, this happened to me when I was getting my master's in education. I said to myself, how am I going to write all these papers? How am I going to do all these readings? I'm an engineer. When it comes to the left brain or right brain, this is purely a metaphor. There's no research, there's no MRI scan that has analytical people's left brain light up or creative people's right brain light up. There's no research like that exists. In fact, I would like to challenge us. What if we say we're better at one, it's because we just haven't challenged the other side? It's these labels that end up really holding ourselves and pigeonholing ourselves into our comfort zone. So instead of focusing in on the right brain or the left brain, what I'd like you to do is challenge your whole brain. Let's go ahead and move on to the third myth. People believe that mistakes while learning are bad. When you look at schools, and you look at many workplaces, they're actually designed to reduce the number of mistakes. Almost like a factory is designed to save time and money and to really reduce the number of mistakes that take place. But I challenge you to see learning environments differently. Let's use the example of language. When I was in school, when I was in high school, I tried to learn Spanish, and I spent 4 years trying to learn Spanish, and I remember very little. When it comes to the idea of languages or any other subjects, the idea of mistakes are so necessary. The best example that shows you the idea of mistakes can be a powerful thing comes from Benny Lewis. Benny Lewis was an electronics engineer who lived in Spain, who moved to Spain, and he lived there for 6 months. And even after 6 months, he still couldn't speak Spanish. He tried to think about how could he change this ability? How could he learn Spanish? He'd always loved languages and culture, and therefore, he really tried to answer this question. What was holding him back? And what he realized was that it was his fear of making mistakes that was holding him back. And he recognized that what happens is that when he would be afraid of saying something wrong, he would go back to his comfort zone. And so he would stop hanging out with native Spanish speakers, and he'd go back and speak to others in English. And what he discovered in this process is that the true advantage children have over adults is that they're naturally less afraid to make mistakes. What he did is that he began to see making mistakes as an opportunity of growth instead of a challenge to success. He began to amplify his mistakes instead of reducing them. In his model, he tried to challenge himself to do more mistakes than he can count. In fact, he came up with the number of 200 mistakes in a day in terms of how he would speak to people and make those mistakes. And those mistakes would be points of learning for him, and it allowed him to really move forward. So when it comes to languages, when it comes to learning environments, mistakes can be a great thing. And I challenge you to think about mistakes in your own life. They're oftentimes more useful than a lot of the theory or a lot of the practice. They can help you learn so much more. Now let's move on to the next myth. People believe that learning gets a lot harder as you age. Well, when you think about all the things that exist, all the examples that are out there, there's no better example that I can think of than Nola Onks. At 95, she graduated with her great-granddaughter from Fort Hays University in Kansas. And because she was an overachiever, she went back to school, got her master's in liberal studies with an emphasis in history at the age of 98. And keep in mind, this is all before ChatGPT made students' lives a lot easier. So I challenge you to think about what is it that you're thinking about that may be holding you back when it comes to age. And she said this, "I don't dwell on my age, as it might limit what I can do. As long as I have my mind and health, age is just a number." Now let's move on to the last myth. People believe that learning needs to be formal. Oftentimes when people think about learning, they think about courses and semesters and syllabuses and curriculums. But learning is so much more. Learning goes beyond formal education or career. Learning is also about our health. It is also about our recreational activities, our hobbies. Learning helps us live a much greater life. I have a confession to make. When I was younger, I never really learned to ride a bike. As I got older, I remember being a teenager and taking the bike out, and I remember falling, and then I remember just coming home and never going out again because I was afraid that my friends and people in the neighborhood would judge me. A few years ago, in the height of COVID, I remember going on a walk and seeing this 6-year-old. As I was walking, he was on his bike, and he smiled at me. And it was almost like he was teasing me. Ryan, you're about to turn 40, and you still can't ride a bike. On that walk, although I had almost given up on the idea of riding a bike, I decided, okay, let me give it a shot. So I remember my wife, going out with my wife and her cheering me on, and I remember taking the bike out a couple times, and then because I was in a residential community, there weren't that many people out there, so I wasn't going to be judged as much. I was still afraid of judgment, but also I was now afraid of breaking a bone. Well, as time went on, a couple weeks into it, I began to learn. I began to gain certain insights. I realized that if I had the seat lower, then I can catch myself, and I wouldn't fall as much. I realized that if I focus on where I was going, instead what I was fearful of, I'd be able to make more progress. I realized that a slight turn could make a big difference. And in this process of learning, before I knew it, I was speeding through the neighborhood. I share this story with you today because this is my learning story, and I challenge you to think about your learning story. Sorry, that kind of looks like my bike. What I'd like you to do is just take a breath. If helpful, close your eyes. And just think for a moment, is there something you've always wanted to learn? Visualize it. Recognize that you absolutely can learn it. Come back, open your eyes. And as I recap, I want you to think about that thing that you want to learn. When it comes to learning, your learning style may hold you in your comfort zone. If you're a visual learner, you may just keep watching videos. You need to challenge yourself to get out of that and recognize that you can learn through many ways and you can be a sponge to move forward. Boxing yourself into left brain or right brain thinking will not be helpful. You have to challenge your whole brain. In this process of learning, you're going to make mistakes. Look at the mistakes as opportunities of growth. Recognize, like Nola Ox, that you can learn at any age. And lastly, know that learning doesn't need to be formal. It can happen based off of your own unconventional path and lead to great progress. I want to end with this idea that learning Life is too short. When it comes to something that is important to you and learning, waiting for the right time, the right conditions, the right environment, all the right things to line up for something that's important to you just doesn't make sense. So I challenge you. I challenge you to choose courage. And I challenge you to choose to take charge of your learning journey now. Thank you.